Hello, welcome to the Horti-Culturalists. I'm Matthew Lucas.
And I'm Stephen Ryan, and today we're at a very, very special garden, which is right behind us. And it's something quite different we haven't done before, and its name gives it away. It's called the Edible Forest, so I'm looking forward to this.
But before we dive in, if you're interested in following our continuing adventures, we post every Friday, so do hit subscribe to watch our adventures. And Stephen, we do a short every Monday where you answer viewers' questions.
Yeah, so don't hesitate to throw a question into the comment section in our YouTube videos, and I'll have a crack at answering it for you.
Okay, we should now dive in. I am very interested to see what the Edible Forest has to offer.
Let's do just that.
Let's go. So Stephen, one of the things then that has struck you in the Edible Forest is this. Why?
Well, it's interesting because I've always known of the edibility of this plant.
Yes.
I've also been a great advocate for it as a garden ornament because it does things all year round.
What is it, Stephen?
Well, what is it? It's a Chinese quince, botanically known as Pseudocydonia, which means mock quince. Sinensis means come from China.
Yes.
So there you go. And I think it's a great tree because it's doing something all the time.
Yeah.
You get pink blossom in the spring.
Yeah.
You get these large fruit which will go yellow by late summer and are usable and edible, although I found they take a little longer to cook than your classical quince.
Yeah.
In the autumn, its foliage goes brilliant colours before it sheds.
Yeah.
And in the winter, it has beautiful marbled bark where bark is peeled off in little sheets and things. So it grows into an interesting form with age and you get this beautiful bark. So you've got spring flowers, summer fruit, autumn foliage, and beautiful winter bark. So what more could you want?
What more could you want?
Yeah, and it's tough and hardy in most climates around here. It will go down to quite low temperatures. It's certainly drought tolerant. So it's a tree with great potential for gardens, particularly in the Victorian area.
Now, how tall is it going to get?
It's going to get to about 4 metres at maximum, so it makes a good small tree for an average garden. So I would definitely consider planting Pseudocydonia sinensis just because it's a beautiful tree and a hardy tree to boot of a good size, and the edibility for me is almost just another factor.
Icing on the cake.
Exactly.
Now, you talked about hardiness. Which part of China is it from? Is it a colder region, so can it go below freezing?
It can go below freezing, but I
Take
don't
frost?
know. It will take frosts, yes, but I don't know whether it would go down to sort of 10 or 15 degrees of frost or whatever. But it can certainly take the sort of frost we can throw at it with a plum.
Yeah. But it's a quince.
No, I said a plum, not a plum.
All right. I'm so distracted. There are so many beautiful fragrances. I'm not sure. Is it the fruit I can smell?
No,
The
no,
herbs that
you're
are-
smelling the oregano and the lemon balm that we're walking through as we're trying to get in to have a look at this quince.
Oh, my goodness, it's beautiful. Well, on to the next.
What a good idea.
So why has this struck your fancy?
Well, it does make me laugh because it's a plant I've been familiar with for years and years and years.
Yeah.
It's a plant called Vitex agnus-castus.
Yeah.
One of the common names is monk's pepper, and the reason it's called that is that they used to believe, whether it's true or not, that if they fed it to monks, who had to, of course, lead a celibate life, that
Where are we going?
It would just lower their libido so that they wouldn't have wicked thoughts. Is basically what it was about.
Let's not touch it then,
Yeah.
Stephen. We all want wicked thoughts.
Yeah.
And where's this from?
It's Mediterranean, so it would have been very handy and useful to all of those Greek Orthodox monks in their little monkeries up on the tops of cliff tops. It would have been available to all of them.
Now, the common name is monk's pepper. So is it the berry or the leaf, do you think?
To be honest, I'm not sure, and I have no intention of finding out.
All right. Well, let's go and find the next wonderful
what a
edible.
good idea.
Now, that I love as well.
Yes.
What's the story with this?
Well, I love these places because I'm learning all the time. Now, this is one of the Campanulas, Campanula punctata, and it has these beautiful nodding bells. They sit that way, and they're a lovely shade of pink. Apparently, all parts of the plant are edible, but particularly so the flowers. So for our flower salads, maybe you would pick one of these Campanulas.
Now, the plant's looking, can I just say, not its best. So what's its life cycle?
Well, it's a herbaceous perennial, so it's summer flowering. It's probably getting basically to the end of its season now. But you could still be going around and plucking individual flowers off for whatever you needed. And it makes quite a large suckering colony. So it would certainly be a plant that produces oodles. So it could well be a useful plant if you acquire a taste for it. And seeing as I never have had a go at it, why not?
Edible garden, Stephen. Taste. Anything?
Interesting texture. There's a little bit of nectar in there, so a little tiny bit of sweetness came through.
Okay.
Otherwise, I have to say reasonably bland. But there you go. But it's nice to know you can, and that's part of the fun of these places, because you find out about plants you didn't know you could use in one way or another.
And now, just a quick question. It's in sort of dappled light. What's the ideal conditions for it?
A lot of the Campanulas don't like to be in too hot and dry an aspect. So underneath the canopy of a large tree will generally suit them quite well.
Yeah.
But in cooler climates, then a little more sun would be required.
Yeah. And I think this is a fabulous plum tree.
It certainly is.
Look, it's amazing plums.
Yeah, well, there you go.
There's deliciousness everywhere. Okay, on to the next.
All right, let's go.
Squashing, Stephen.
Yes, we're down near ground level because we need to be. In amongst a whole patch of a very well-known garden plant, commonly known as Solomon seal, Polygonatum hybridum. And it is a beautiful and elegant plant in a woodland setting in a garden, so semi-shaded aspect. Yeah. It's grown all through Europe, all through North America. We grow it in the cooler parts of Australia a lot. 3 stems in a vase when it's in flower and you're suddenly a floral artiste. And so all those things I have more than familiarity with. And I vaguely remembered, but it hadn't come to my mind until I'd seen this plant here, that it's also edible. And in fact, the young shoots, when they're coming through, can be picked.
Like asparagus.
And cooked exactly the same way. So you can cook them like asparagus. But what I didn't know, apparently the dried leaves can also be turned into a substitute for tea. So there's something I must try at some stage or another and see whether I end up with a nice Earl Grey or whatever.
Now, do you think all the Solomon seals are edible? Because this is a thing, isn't it? Do you think some of them might be poisonous?
It's unlikely that any of them are poisonous if one is edible, but that doesn't mean that the others would be palatable, because there's a difference between edibility and palatability. And so some things can be edible, but not exactly the most exciting flavours in the world. And I've noticed a few things around the garden here that I have tried before and thought,
no.
So there are some plants that, yes, they're edible, but they must be an acquired taste. So yes, I've not tried Solomon seal, and I have to say it would hurt a bit to pluck those lovely strong young shoots off it just as it was coming through the ground.
Mind you, this is such a big clump. You wouldn't miss 1 or 2.
No, but you probably have to pick a fair few to make a meal.
True.
Especially for 2 people. So yes, so Solomon seal, another edible plant.
Who knew?
Yeah, well, we do now.
We do now. On to the next.
All right.
What has caught you right now, Stephen?
Well,
the apples. Look at these juicy apples.
No, it isn't the apples that's caught my eye. It's the plant growing under it. And this is a South American vegetable, commonly known as yacón, Smallanthus sonchifolius. And it is a fantastic foliage plant. So I would grow this as an ornamental in my garden, even if I didn't know that it was edible. And I have had it and grew it for years. And for some reason or another, yacón has disappeared out of my collection. So I must see if I can get it again, because
there's a shop at the top of the hill, Stephen.
Yeah, you never know. They might have some yacons in pots for sale. We'll have to check it out later. It has small yellow daisies, because it's in the same family as the Jerusalem artichokes and the sunflowers and all those sort of things. But it produces a large dahlia-like tuber underneath it. And if you dig the tubers, stand them in the sun for 24 hours to 48 hours, that brings up the sugars, and you can eat them like an apple.
Really?
So you can cut it up and use it in salads, and it's crisp and crunchy like celery. Kids in Peru just eat them as an apple type alternative, and they can produce enormous tubers if you're growing it in really rich, good soil. So it's a very productive plant, and why more people don't grow it, I don't know. My only issue with it was that I had to think 48 hours ahead if I was going to dig some to use in a recipe in the kitchen, and I'm not always good at that.
Its hardiness and preference, so it's literally growing at the foot of an apple tree. So strong dappled shade.
Which is not where I would normally grow it. I used to grow it out in my perennial border. In full sun. I would certainly grow it in the vegetable garden where I could keep it pumped up with lots of fertilizer and things to get extra big tubers on it. So it's a perfectly serviceable herbaceous perennial with edible tubers that you could use right through the winter months. It's not ever going to be a major food crop though, because it doesn't store for terribly long. So you need to lift it, ripen it in the sun, and then eat it reasonably soon afterwards. It doesn't store like a potato.
So, but if we're thinking of propagation, and if you're eating the whole tuber, is it like a potato in that you can cut up the tuber and bits of it can regenerate, or?
In fact, it's like a dahlia. You've got to slice off a piece of tuber with a piece of stem.
Right.
So you divide your clump with a piece of stem on each tuber,
Right.
and then replant those back. So you only need to save enough tubers with a piece of attendant stem to replant for the following year. So what I would normally do is I'd lift a clump. There'd be more than I could eat in one sitting, obviously. I'd chop it up into several plants. I'd immediately plant some back because they don't store well, and then I'd gobble my way through the rest.
There you go. And so similar life cycle to a dahlia.
Yeah,
so
treat it like dahlias. Yeah, and I think it's a great plant. And now that it has leapt out at me in our little visit here, I'm on the hunt, so I need a yacón.
There you go. All right. Well, I think we should maybe go down to the water garden because that is a lovely concept.
Yes, let's go and have a look at some of the edibles there.
Okay. Well, here's the thing. It's a pond, really. It's
Yeah.
a water garden. We've made a video about water gardens. We have a whole playlist, which we'll link.
Yeah.
But the thing here is, of course, that this is a productive water garden. And what a great idea. Never would have occurred to me.
What, you've never thought of growing water chestnuts?
No, but only using plants that you can eat.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm going to do a little taste test with you.
Yes.
We have a piece of Houttuynia cordata, which is a herbaceous perennial that loves bogs and swamps and wet conditions.
Yes.
It is well thought of in some Asian countries for cooking and so forth.
Yes.
I have tried it. I know what it tastes like.
Yes.
It's your turn.
Oh, okay.
And remember the difference between edibility and palatability? You're allowed to spit it out. I do not particularly like it either. Yuck.
It's interesting. The first taste is quite light and lovely, and then it becomes really astringent.
Yeah, yes. And look, maybe it's only used in actual cooked recipes. I don't know, but I don't find it particularly palatable. And I have to say, it's one of those plants that everybody goes, ooh, it's edible. We should plant some. Let's put them in our edible garden. What they don't know about Houttuynia is if the conditions suit it well, it's an absolute thug.
Is it?
Yeah, it will wander right through your edible garden, and it will cope with drier conditions as well. So just having a bog isn't going to keep it in place. And it's virtually impossible to eradicate once you've planted it. So be happy with the plant if you decide to put it in either as a garden plant, because it has quite attractive little white flowers on it, or as an edible plant if you like the flavour of Houttuynia. But I, for one, spent a lot of time getting it out of my bog garden years ago.
Okay.
So I wouldn't recommend it.
Now, I'm just noticing on the far side of the pond is a gunnera.
Yes.
What's the... we've made a gunnera story, and I vaguely remember. What's the story with that?
You can pick the young stems
That's right,
of young leaves, peel them, and then you dip the young stems in salt and you eat them, and they taste exactly like salt. They don't have a lot of their own flavour, but they are edible. So, yes, you have to spice them up a bit with some salt. So there's other interesting plants in here. We have nardoo, which is a native plant in Australia, although it does grow in other countries as well. And the local people used to grind up the tubers and make a flour from nardoo. So there's bulrushes as well, and you can eat the rhizomes of bulrushes.
Can you?
Yeah, so there's lots of lovely water tolerant and loving plants that have edibility.
I wish you could smell, viewers. We're what are we standing in? This smells heavenly.
Yes, well, it's one of the agnus-castus, I think, and it's got a lovely perfume as well, but you can see it's more on the drier side of the bog garden, so it's not exactly out in the water. But there's some really interesting plants here. And I just noticed over here an Arbutus, which we've done a video on as well, on the genus. This particular one is a hybrid Arbutus, and it gets quite large red fruit. Arbutus fruit is edible. It's also a good bee attractant because it flowers for months and months and months. This particular one lurked around in Australia for years as Arbutus canariensis, but it's actually the hybrid from the wild of Arbutus canariensis and Arbutus unido, and it goes under the wonderful name of Arbutus androsterilis. So there you go.
Marvellous. We'll refer you to our Arbutus epic to learn all about that. Well, what a great way to consider a water garden and its practicality.
Yeah, exactly. So every habitat within your garden can, in fact, have something edible if you wish to go that path.
There you go. Now, I just wanted to stop by this, which is the blueberry, because it's not that extraordinary and it's great to have in an edible garden. But look how big it is. I thought blueberries were always, small ground-hugging planty shrubs rather than... This is taller than me.
Yeah, it's one of the high bush blueberries. And just think of the practicality of not having to bend down to pick the blueberries. I mean, really.
I can't resist.
Yeah.
Thank you, Edible Forest.
Yeah.
Oh,
better than the Houttuynia, huh?
It is a little bit. But it's also quite a handsome shrub. And
They are.
is dripping in fruit. Now, here's the question. It looks to me as though the fruit is on old growth. What is the fruiting?
Yes, well, it's
cycle?
on the growth from the previous year. So the growth that comes out here now will become the fruiting growth for next year. So blueberries don't need a lot of pruning. You just take out some of the older redundant wood, otherwise leave them alone. And of course, the thing that always attracts me to these sort of plants, apart from the taste of the delicious berries, is the fact that the plant is also ornamental. I mean, they have quite attractive little lily of the valley-like flowers on them. And in the autumn, most of the blueberries go stunning colours before they shed their leaves. Yes, so they give a wonderful autumn effect in the garden as well.
I mean, that's the thing that we've touched on, is just the design element, that so many of these things look beautiful in a garden bed rather than in a vegetable or a fruit garden or an orchard.
Well, exactly. I mean, you can have your fruit and eat it, and you can also have a garden and eat it.
Yeah.
So it doesn't have to be one of those sort of practical everything in rows type of garden.
So where are blueberries from? What's their native?
Well, these
country?
particular ones are, of course, from the USA and up into Canada. So the Americas basically is where most of the commercial blueberries come from.
But because you've got a little thing, and we've done a video about that as well. Goodness, so many videos sitting about neotropical blueberries. So they are from the same family.
Yes, but they're not the same genus, so they're not vacciniums, a lot of them. They are in other genera in that whole family, so in the Ericaceae family, that also produce berries that in fact are edible. Some of them every bit as good as blueberries. How many of them are as productive as a blueberry bush is another matter. But if you're only growing them for your own pleasure and what have you,
As you are.
as I do, I quite like a browseberry, something that you just come along.
Oh, a browseberry, is that
Yes.
what they're called?
Well, that's what I call them.
Oh.
If I'm wandering around the garden and there's a ripe berry on something that I can eat, I browse as I go. So I don't need to pick vast quantities of it to make something from.
Yeah.
I can just have them growing in the garden and enjoy them as I walk past.
There you go. Not a bad principle.
I think it works for me.
If you were going to plant it as a garden shrub, what sort of conditions? This is fairly full sun, isn't it?
Yeah, they will cope with a lot of sun, except in the really hottest of climates, of course.
Yeah.
But they do like a winter, cold, summer, warm-oriented climate. They like their roots to be somewhat shaded. They like an acid soil because they're in the Ericaceae family, and virtually everything in that family likes an acid soil. And so as long as their roots are in the shade, the top can go into the light, they'll colour better and berry better. Stop it, you naughty boy. They will certainly berry better if they're out in a fair bit of sunlight, but they just don't want to get desiccated. And so in an average garden, they would make lovely companion plants on the slightly sunnier side, say, of a rhododendron or something like that.
Yeah.
Yep, so why not indeed?
Excellent. So, Stephen, some things that you were surprised by.
Yes. I've learnt a lot. I've come across plants that I've known before but didn't realise they had edible uses. I've come across plants that I wasn't familiar with that have edible uses. So it's been quite an engaging day, I have to say.
Yeah. And for me, it's just the design of it. It's designed like a pleasure garden, a decorative garden, and yet it is all productive. So I think, without further ado, we should go and meet the head gardener and ask some more particular questions about this garden and what it stands for.
I think that's a very good idea. I'm sure she'll be able to give us all sorts of information.
Off we go.
Well, we're in the edible forest, and here we have the head gardener, Jaimie, and she's going to tell us all about the beauties and the usabilities of this particular garden.
Thank you for having us, Jaimie.
Yes, thank
my
you.
pleasure.
And I bought you a wee gift.
I'm excited.
There we go. This is a Disterigma alaternoides,
Oh,
which
my
is
goodness.
a neotropical blueberry from Western South America and Panama, which will look lovely in a hanging basket up by
Okay.
your office, I am sure. So there's a little gift for you.
Thank you so much. I'm very excited about that one. I've heard you talk about it before.
Yes, and I do link the story, of course.
And I did happen to see the blueberry, which I may have eaten, Jaimie, down the path as well.
Yeah, they're doing amazing at the moment,
They are.
aren't they?
You might, at some point, be able to eat the one berry that this produces.
Yes, don't expect this to be overly productive, although I have to say mine is starting to flower really well this year after 3.5 years in a hanging basket.
I'm really fascinated by it, and I do work in a permaculture garden, so I do understand the patience. Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about it. How big is the edible garden for a start, which is always a good start?
That's a good start. So the edible forest is exactly 1 acre.
Yeah.
So it's not beyond people to create in their own garden.
I wouldn't think so. And even in patches, you don't have to have a whole acre. You can very much do a food forest. I mean, you can kind of walk around and just single zones out. And if that was your garden, that would be your garden.
One of the things that struck me is just the design, that you feel as though you're walking through a garden, that you don't feel you're walking through a productive garden. So was that the point when the garden was laid out?
Well, the actual layout of the garden is because they've put all the garden beds on the contours where they hold water.
Right.
So it's all Houttuynia. So we've built our soil.
Right.
So, and that's why
Hang on.
it is.
Explain Houttuynia.
Okay. So Houttuynia is we built our soil. So we are actually on 120 acres here in the Yarra Valley estate.
Yeah.
So we've got a lot of logs from the property.
Yeah.
Laid them around the contours.
Yeah.
Got horse manure from a neighbour that we swapped with veggies.
Yeah.
Put that out, and that sort of, as that breaks down, it builds soil.
Right.
And then the contours holds water naturally. So we don't really, you can see in areas it's actually very wet in here. We do have irrigation in here, but we don't need to irrigate very often because of that.
Really?
So yeah, it does have that wandering feel.
Which is quite natural, because
yeah,
you
but it
would
is
wander
actually
the
sort of
contours.
natural.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. So that's kind of unconsidered considered.
Exactly. I think people think the whole garden was very much designed and by one. It was a collaborative effort of a lot of different people and different ideas, and it just sort of happened.
That does raise the question, though, Jaimie. How long's it been here?
8 years. This was a paddock.
Yeah.
So 8 years from construction.
Wow.
Well, some of the
Yeah.
trees and things are getting up to certainly quite good size.
They are. They're going to have to figure what to do with that out. They're kind of going over the net.
Yeah. Well, that's
all right.
that's the other thing we haven't actually mentioned. This whole garden is actually completely netted,
Yep.
so that keeps out, I assume, possums and cockatoos and galahs and
Kangaroos.
kangaroos. All of the animals
Rabbits
that might
and
actually.
deer.
Oh yes, and rabbits, of course. All those animals that would want to compete with you for the food.
Yeah.
So it's important to have that in place. The other thing I wanted to ask, it's obviously a permaculture style of garden.
Yeah.
How closely have you followed permaculture sort of regulations and rules?
Can I put my hand up and can
Yeah.
I say, what is permaculture?
All right. Well, yes, you can do that as well.
Well, permaculture is sort of, I guess it's a whole round system. So it is very much a permaculture garden, but I wouldn't say we sit there and follow every single rule by the book.
Yeah.
It's very intuitive, this garden, and we sort of manage it that way. But permaculture itself is sort of like, we do have the chickens, and the food scraps from the wedding conference centre go to the chickens, which then make us compost, which then comes in here. We do composting on site as well, which helps build our soil up.
Yeah.
And all the plants are sort of planted to interact with each other. So there'll be different layers. So it is very full in here,
It
but
is.
all the plants are sort of put in spots where there'll sort of be different layers, and it sort of helps the other ones grow, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So they'll protect each other from frost, create sort of a microclimate, and we have a lot of living mulch and stuff like that. So does that sort of answer the question?
It does. So
but-
I guess
yeah.
permaculture is cyclical, that
Yeah.
whatever comes in comes out, and that everything, so instead of monoculture,
Yes.
where you just have rows of the same thing, you've got things that are supporting each other, but literally in some cases.
Exactly.
I've got a question though, because there's a plant here that in my wildest dreams I would never plant again. And it's that Houttuynia down there.
Yeah.
Um,
I know the one you're talking about.
Yeah. It took me, I reckon, 3 years to get it out of my bog garden originally, because it's got these rhizomes that go forever. Do you regret having plants like that in the garden? Or
Some.
It's a learning curve.
Yeah, we've all learned. That is definitely one I would not plant again, and I wasn't here when they did plant that. And I've
an
tried
absolute bug, isn't it?
tried to eradicate it. Look, it does act like a living mulch. We don't weed there and stuff, but I would love to get rid of patches of it, and I wouldn't be one I recommend.
And do you like the taste of it?
No.
No,
Oh, that's
It
good.
smells like sea salt.
Yeah, I made Matthew eat a leaf of it, and yes, he had to quietly throw it away.
Yeah.
It wasn't charming.
No, it's
No.
not charming. So it does go to show, though, that edibility and palatability
Two
can,
different
in
things.
fact, be two different things.
Yes.
So, yes, it's edible. I don't like it. I've never met anybody that does.
You know, surprisingly, I have the occasional people that come through here and they absolutely love it.
Really?
I think in my time here, it's been at least 3 to 5 people. That's probably it.
So
yeah.
maybe not
Is it
worth
worth it? No.
focusing your garden on. So I'm just curious, what is your favourite thing about this garden, or about it, or in it?
I just like how the whole system works. So I quite often get asked, which is your favorite plant? And to me, singly, the plants are amazing. I mean, I love all plants really, but it's how it all sort of works within the system. And I think it's a great collection of plants in terms of that. Any time of year you could come and forage in here.
Yeah.
Even in winter, it's, obviously a bit harder, but you're still getting out strawberry guavas or the medlars, which is behind us, or we've got, the rock samphire and the aniseed myrtle you can still harvest from. So it's all year round there is something of interest.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
And it's full of butterflies.
It is.
And the fragrance in here, which is not a floral fragrance, is the fragrance of all of these beautiful herbs. The leaves. It's just a glorious, healthy smell.
Yeah, it does. It feels very healthy in here, doesn't it?
It does.
And when you're talking about productiveness, you say that you can be foraging all year round, which is fantastic. But does it really produce really viable crops of anything? Or is it just the fun of having something you can browse as you walk past more?
So in terms of if it was a home garden, I would say yes.
Yep.
You can definitely, we do a lot of preserving, and we do get a abundant of a lot of things, like we have a lot of quinces and we do quince paste for the chefs. And in terms of that, but in terms of just we would not grow all the food for a wedding conference centre. So we do a lot of preserves, we do relishes and that, and we do the veggie beds, the main turnover for them. And some of their stuff in here they don't even want because it is weird.
Yeah, well, I'd send them up some Houttuynia if I was you. You've got oodles.
It's happened before and they weren't impressed. So.
Well, Jaimie, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for letting us wander around. It is the most glorious place. So if you're in Melbourne, if you feel like a day trip to the Yarra Valley, you should definitely come to the Edible Farm. We'll put the links below. And you actually host the tours.
I do, actually. So there's a few of us, but I do a lot of them. So Fridays and Saturdays for general public. It's always better to book ahead though, so we know you're coming. And we also do group tours by appointment.
There you go. So if you're in the neighborhood, do come along, and Jaimie might be your guide through this wonderful garden. Thank you, Jaimie. We're going to go and have another wander.
Awesome. Thank you.
See you later.
See ya.
Stephen, some things look slightly poisonous and deadly, and this doesn't look like something that I would browse on.
No. And in fact, when I first started growing this plant, which is botanically known as Aronia melanocarpa, melano black carpa fruit, I just grew it as an ornamental because it has lovely white flowers, it has attractive black berries, its foliage goes the most outrageous reds and oranges in the autumn before it sheds. So as an ornamental, it's a fantastic plant. And of course, its common name always put me off the idea of trying the berries.
Which is?
Chokeberry.
Exactly. Why would you call something edible a chokeberry?
Yeah, well, it's not going to sell in punnets in the supermarket, I can tell you that now. So the chokeberry, there's basically two species, the red chokeberry and the black chokeberry, and there's also a hybrid between them. So I guess that's the intermediate red and black chokeberry. And they're fabulous suckering shrubs, grows up to about 2.5 meters potentially. They don't need a lot of care and attention. They're prone to attack in Victoria by pear and cherry slug, unfortunately, which can sometimes scletalise the leaves a bit. But otherwise, they're a very hardy shrub, very productive. They produce masses and masses of berries. And when they're fully ripe, they are actually reasonably tasty. So there you go.
Now, where's it from?
North American.
Right.
Yep.
And hardiness, what does it prefer? Sun?
It would like a sunny but not dry aspect, not too dry, because most fruiting plants need adequate moisture to pump up their fruit. They like a slightly acidic soil. They'll go down to any low temperature you want to throw at them. I'm sure they'll grow through most of Canada. They'll go through Scotland. They'll grow in all those sorts of places. But they don't cope with 45 degrees and a howling northwesterly in Victoria necessarily.
That's 110 degrees Fahrenheit. Hot.
Yes, and we haven't had one of those for 3 years, and I don't want another one, but they will come again. As we know. So Aronia is a funny little genus of fairly underrated shrubs for the garden, but if you're interested in doing something that is also edible and highly ornamental, as we found this whole garden is in a sense, then chokeberry could be one of those plants you add into your palette. And
a lot of the things that we have mentioned do have other things like autumn foliage or beautiful flowers. So there's a lot going on here. It's amazing.
Yes, so it's not just growing a row of cabbages, is it?
No, indeed. So Stephen, one of the things that really strikes me about this garden is just how beautiful it is. I mean, when we were driving out, for those of you not in Australia,
Yes.
the Yarra Valley, which is where we are, is an area in Victoria, near Melbourne, famous for its wines and its vineyards. So
Which are stunning.
They are. It's a really beautiful part of the world. And obviously, they are monoculture, and rose and rose and rose are the same thing. So this is a permaculture garden.
Yes.
And here we are. Everything is so different, but it's so beautiful.
It is, and it just goes to show that any of you who've been into permaculture or thought about becoming a permaculturalist, that it doesn't need to be just utilitarian. With the proper blending and diversity of plant material, it can become just as beautiful a garden as any ornamental garden can be, plus the extra advantage of having something you can eat at the same time. So why not indeed engage with it?
I think for me, it's a revelation how things are used. Like, we're just passing an apple tree,
Yes.
which is planted as a decorative tree, would be planted in an ornamental garden. And your favourite sambuca, Stephen.
Yes, the plant that I hold the national collection of is growing beautifully in this garden, and they seem to have 2 or 3 different clones of it growing here. So, yes, so the garden is full of all sorts of useful, sometimes borderline useful, but that's not a bad thing either, because it gives you a sense of some of the things that you can use plants for, other than necessarily just getting a big crop of something you can eat. I quite like having some of these types of plants in the garden because they're browsers. You can walk around and browse from them. You don't have to get a great big crop of whatever. You just eat them as you go past. And I think that's a fabulous way of gardening, really, because you're enjoying the beauty and ambience of your property as well as the taste.
Yes. Well, this has been, I'm going to say, it's a revelation, because it is so, so, so beautiful. And it's a wonderful way to consider a garden. And even if you don't, this is an acre, as Jaimie, the head gardener, pointed out. But even if you don't have this much space, you can still basically achieve this even in a small suburban plot, or a window box, or a balcony, a terrace.
Nothing should stop you growing plants. And if you want to grow plants that are edible, no matter what sort of conditions you find yourself in, you'll find some plants you can grow. So why not indeed?
There you go. Well, I have so loved this trip.
It's been great fun.
And if you want to know what we might be doing next week, you're going to have to hit subscribe to find that out. We do post every Friday.
And come along on the ride with us. And don't forget that we do shorts every Monday as well. So if you've got a question, and this garden certainly could raise many questions from people, please get in touch and we'll have a crack at answering it for you.
So we look forward to seeing you next week.
Bye all.